So your government's never wasted any money?
A taxpayer-funded documentary on Green MP Chlöe Swarbrick is ruffling feathers among her peers.
After a government agency dished out $200,000 of taxpayer money to make a documentary about her life.
Taxpayer money from a government agency making a feature-length film with the name of a politician running for office in it.
There is a documentary that is going to be following her for the next 2 years. It has funding from New Zealand On Air.
The feature-length documentary has been awarded $200,000 of funding from NZ On Air.
The board of New Zealand On Air, so generous in giving out your money to make propaganda videos.
Exploring the life of our youngest MP. Problematic given we're actually in a cost of living crisis. People don't really have a lot of time for this sort of indulgence, do they?
The star of the show says any of her fellow politicians would have agreed to do it too.
It was pretty interesting, given the contrast with the likes of Dancing with the Stars.
Dancing with the Stars is not funded with taxpayer money.
Any of your MPs you'd make a doco about?
I think all of them would say no.
Even a Labour Party MP who I was speaking to over the weekend was saying how outrageous it is.
Is that appropriate to give funding to publicity around a politician?
Like most politicians, when asked to participate in a piece of local media, I said yes.
Someone approached me and said they wanted to do a documentary on me in these circumstances. I would have said get lost.
Yeah, it is surprising for a Green MP not to have had the wherewithal to do that.
The fact that taxpayer dollars are going to any politician that could heighten their profile.
The fact is, it's for a sitting MP.
There are lots of stories that we're telling, and I would hate to think that because you were a politician or an active one, you couldn't have your story told.
Well, of course, they've already funded and put to air another documentary about Chlöe.
It will be the third recent documentary on Ms Swarbrick, made with NZ On Air funding. There was this short doco called OK Chlöe.
Okay, boomer.
Next was 3 Ticks Chlöe. Now, Being Chlöe is on the way.
New Zealand On Air funds this doco on a Green Party MP. I mean, you could argue it should do the same for all the other parties' MPs.
We could give all politicians their own documentary.
Or not.
It's not going to happen because basically you have an intrinsically left-wing organisation and they'll be pushing their own political views.
They only seem to be funding stuff that promotes one side of politics.
The Greens aren't concerned they might be getting an unfair advantage.
Those are independent decisions made by an independent organisation. I don't have thoughts that decision is up for them.
You know, New Zealand On Air makes its own decisions about what it funds and what it does. It's an independent body. Got nothing against Chlöe. I think she's a good person, but it just doesn't feel right, does it?
A lot of money.
I think that it would be entirely remiss of anybody who believes that we should have this independent state funder that is making these decisions independently to all of a sudden start having the state dictate what sort of New Zealand content is made and what sort of New Zealand content is not.
The process for funding needs to be robust, and it also needs to be independent.
You have to operate the arm's length principle when it comes to funding agencies like Creative New Zealand and New Zealand On Air.
Are there any apparent conflicts in the people who run the New Zealand On Air board?
The elephant in the room, you have the Prime Minister's media coach, the personal lawyer to Clark Gayford, sitting on the New Zealand On Air board.
The government says NZ On Air is independent and is answerable for its funding decisions. In turn, NZ On Air refused to answer our questions today, saying it was too busy to be interviewed.
Well, I did use the word corruption in my opinion.
Being Chlöe will come out after the next election.
Does releasing it after the election, which seems to be their defence, does that make it okay?
No, of course not. It's the principle that matters, and that is that they should not show political favouritism, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Regardless of whether it's an election year or not, funding $200,000 just for the script development.
No, 20 grand for the script development, 200 grand for the for getting it made and aired.
Not a small amount of funding.
200 grand, which could go could go a lot of ways during these current difficult days, not necessarily on a film crew tailing Chlöe Swarbrick around the place. I don't know.
This isn't sort of some balanced journalistic type documentary, which is evidenced by the fact you need a script for it. The first film or documentary about Chlöe is absolute hero worshipping.
If you're not there for the long haul, then it's hard to see the work getting done at all. Parliament is a toxic culture that chews people up and spits them out. The system dehumanises people, and you therefore become inhuman and disconnected from the people who you purport to represent. I will keep going as long as I feel like I am making change, but I don't want to be here in 10 years because change is needed now. there's a benefit in being able to be genuine, because far too many politicians hold up these facades which everybody just sees through anyway as BS.
It's absolute hero worshipping.
The politicians who are comfortable with resting on their laurels, not going to let them do that anymore.
I think if the story that comes out is that young women who are activists, who are passionate about their community, can go into politics, have a career, that's a good story.
Brooke Van Velden from the ACT Party, right, who was instrumental with the euthanasia bill. Would New Zealand On Air sign off on funding for somebody who's from the right of politics? Is this because it's a lefty thing?
Well, is it because David Seymour's jealous that he hasn't got a documentary about him? I mean, is this what this is about? Chloe's an easy one to take a pot shot at.
Yeah, but it's $200K.
That it is the continued decline of a culture of professionalism in the public service. These are the people that we're supposed to trust for the Public Interest Journalism Fund. No wonder public confidence is through the floor. One of my staff called me and pointed out that they were in the Herald today responding to the Taxpayers Union, calling it misinformation. The fact that a government agency is using the word misinformation for a transparency group holding it into account is the very issue, the very thing of the politicisation of this agency. I sincerely apologise. This is my retraction and apology. It's instead of $220,000, it's $219,000. There's a lot more to come in relation to NZ On Air.
People throw it at us because there is the public interest journalism funding that people are saying, oh, you're being bought by the government, the news media. We're not. We're just using it to help us drive journalism. So you could complain about the heaps of stuff, but I do wonder whether David's just jealous.